Greetings and welcome back to another Marvel Snap video. Today, as promised, I'm going to dive deep into the pool 3 cards, and currently there are 98 cards in this pool, so I'll do my best to cover them all as quickly as possible. For each card, I'll not only give a brief comment but also assign them a tier. S tier cards are the best ones, A tier are the strong ones, B are okay, and C are the worst. Remember, if your favorite card ends up with a lower tier, don't take it personally, it's just my take on their strength and usefulness in the current meta. So without further ado, let's dive right into the Marvel Snap Pool 3 and brace yourself, this is going to be a long video. Let's start with the Wasp, and I know that I will surprise you immediately here because I will assign to this card a tier A, and I know that you think it's probably too much for a card that on paper is not so strong, but trust me, this card already used to be very good in the past. It was mainly used in the Patriot decks or for example in the Lockjaw lottery, but now also with the introduction of High Evolutionary, this card it's even stronger than what it used to be, and it's definitely in the meta right now. So tier A is more than deserved in my opinion. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same about the Yellow Jacket. I assigned this card a tier C. This is a card that of course it pairs well with Luke Cage, which is growing in popularity right now, but unfortunately this does not change the general overall value of Yellow Jacket. So unfortunately I don't find it very useful right now. It's not in the meta, and this is also the reason why you see it played very rarely even in the opponent's deck. Then we have the Hood, and for the Hood I gave it a tier A again. The reason for that is because the Hood pairs with a number of nice cards like Beast, like Angela, like Bishop, and also you can get rid of the -2 card in different way. You could destroy it in a destroy deck, you could bring it back to your hand using for example Beast, or you could even send it to the opponent using Viper. So there are a number of ways to get rid of the -2 and to take advantage of the additional card that you get, which is quite powerful. So I think also the Hood deserves to have an A. Then we have Bast. I have assigned Bast a tier B. I think the card is good, especially if paired with Locos cards for obvious reason. Also it can be used nicely with Mysterio and also with Beast, but generally speaking I didn't use it in many decks. I don't see this card as super powerful. It's a good card but not that good, so for me tier B, I think it's a good compromise. Then we have Deadpool. I have assigned Deadpool also a tier B. Of course, this is a card that you have to use in a destroy deck. On the other hand, for the destroy decks, there are better cards in Pool 3. There are stronger cards in Pool 3. We'll see them later. So Deadpool, I think it deserves just a B. The next card we have is Ghost. I assigned this card a tier C. The ability itself, it sounds like a nice ability, but honestly, I don't really feel the need of adding this card in most of my decks. I don't find this as a priority. It's a card that generally speaking it pairs well with Kitty Pryde, with Shang-Chi, but generally speaking it's not one of my favorite. It's kind of not really needed. It's a nice addition but not really needed, so tier C I think it's what in the hand it deserves right now. Same as Human Torch, another card that is clearly not in the meta right now, as whole movement decks. Generally speaking, just for you to know so that I don't have to repeat myself in the future, I'm not a big fan of movement decks. I'm surprised when I see players still using these decks because usually to me it looks like you are giving away cubes basically. And of course Human Torch is in the hand a movement card like Iron Fist, Cloak, so unfortunately, those decks right now are definitely not in the meta. They are not performing very well. Actually, they are not consistent at all. So unfortunately, a C also for Human Torch. Same as for M'Baku, a card that personally I find almost useless. Maybe if you're having a Galactus deck and you need that extra power, but still, honestly, I will not insert M'Baku as well in any of my decks. So it's a tier C as well. And then we move to Quinjet. This is a tier B in my opinion. It's a card that is very nice with cards like Agent Coulson, Agent 14, White Queen, and of course the Collector for obvious reason, because then you're going to boost the Collector. It's also very good with Devil Dino, because in the hand you are going to make sure that you have many cards in your hand, and of course you can also use it and pair it with Mystique. So actually it's a card that can be really played with many other cards, but personally speaking I do not like it too much because with the exception of White Queen that I usually use for understanding what kind of deck my opponent has. I'm not a big fan of all these cards that give you a random pick like Agent Cold or Agent 14, so generally speaking I'm not a big fan of Queen Jet as well, because I do not really rely on those cards too frequently. So only tier B in my opinion, but if you see it as more powerful, I can understand also your point of view. Then we have Zero, a card that many tend to ignore. In my opinion, this is a very solid card. I assign to this card a tier A because it's an enabler of power cards such as Ebony Maw, Titania, Mary, Lizard, and in the end the main alternative that we have here is with Sauron. But the problem with Sauron is that then you cannot really have other ongoing cards in your deck. Then we have Titania. We were talking about this while talking about Zero. Assigned to this card a B. I will say that it's an A with Zero because you don't have the problem of calculating where it will end up. But of course, if you play it without Zero, it's just a B because you have to carefully predict the opponent move, and this can be kind of challenging. So it's a bit situational. Then we have Adam Warlock. I assign this card also at B tier, and the reason for that is because personally, I never use it that much. It still requires you to take anyway the lead on one location to take advantage of its ability. I will not consider it overpowered. On the other hand, it's also not completely trash, so it doesn't deserve to be on the C tier, but definitely it's somewhere between B and C. Then we have Black Widow. Black Widow is another situational card in my opinion, and it's not that powerful in terms of the power it brings to the table. So I assign this card also at B. Then we have Psylocke, and Psylocke instead is another card that I think it's quite strong. So I assign this card an A. In my opinion, as a ramp card, is even a better alternative to Electro because it doesn't have the side effect of Electro. Then we have Beast. I have assigned Beast the B, similarly to Bust. These two cards, I often play them in decks where they go together, basically. And so it's not that surprising that they are on the same tier level. Beast is a card that plays well with Angela, with Bishop, with Mysterio. Generally speaking, outside of this kind of combination, it doesn't find a lot of room, and that's why in the end I gave it a B. Then we have Dagger, again, movement card, so it's kind of automatic tier C. There is the movement penalty that I apply to the cards that belong to movement. And then we have Daredevil. Daredevil is another tier A in my opinion because right now the control decks are in the meta. Daredevil is very strong because it gives you the possibility to understand what your opponent is doing at the end of the match, and then of course there are the great combination as always with the Professor X, for example, Spider-Man, and now also that we have Nebula. That's another reason why it's nice to have control cards in your deck, and Daredevil is one of them. So absolutely a well-deserved A for Daredevil. Then we have Goose. I have assigned a B tier to Goose. Usually you will find it in Surfer Sera variations, but apart from that I find it quite situational. Apart from the Surfer Sera variation, I will not really include it in many decks, so I think B is more than sufficient. And then we have Azmat. I have assigned this card a tier A because this, in my opinion, is one of the strongest on-reveal cards of Pool 3. Of course, for obvious reason, it is often paired with Wong because then you are basically annihilating the opponent, and of course also you might bring in the game Luke Cage, who is not affected by the penalty. The reason why I have assigned Azmat the tier A is also because it can be included in the high evolutionary decks, and so I think that this card is still quite meta right now. Then we have Luke Cage. We were talking about this briefly just now, so I have assigned this card a B tier. I will not say that it's on the same level of Azmat in my opinion, but it's usually part of the same decks, so it's a good combo together, and yeah. Itself is not so strong in my opinion, that's why it's a B, but then when in combination of course with Azmat, these two cards together are a very nice combination. The next card is an archenemy of the X-Men, and I have assigned him a B tier because I find this card quite situational. I didn't assign the C tier only because his potential power is still nice, it's still sweet, but on the other hand, it is true that as soon as this card gets played, the opponent will do everything possible to prevent the location from being filled. And that's what in the end makes this card not so powerful and quite situational. So B tier for him. Then we have Baron Mordo. Honestly, I think this we could easily skip it, saying just tier C. It's objectively one of the worst cards in the game, if not the worst card in the game. So yes, I think this is a common opinion, so there is not much to say. And then we have Falcon. I have assigned Falcon a B tier because it's a good match for the usual gang we have already described. So Beast, Angela, Bishop, Collector, Bust, they all go usually very nicely together. On the other hand, apart from this specific kind of deck, it doesn't really find a lot of usage in the game right now, at least not in my opinion. And that's why in the end, even though it has nice synergies like the one I have just mentioned, I still assign it only a B tier. Then we have Invisible Woman. Here I know that I will be unpopular. Many of you will probably place it on the B level. I have instead assigned it the C tier to Invisible Woman, and the reason for that is because, yes, of course, it is used to hide certain surprise cards like Hela, Modok, Wong, etc. But exactly because I know more or less what to expect behind an Invisible Woman, usually I tend to play automatically a Cosmo there, and yeah, usually this ruin the surprise effect to whoever tried to place Invisible Woman. So for me, it's not as strong as it seems, so tier C. Then we have Maria Hill. I have assigned the B tier here. Same as Coulson, Agent 13, etc. I have already mentioned that, of course, these cards have nice synergies with the Devil Dino and the Collector, but I don't like the randomness that they bring, the lack of control that you have on the cards that end up in your hand. So for this reason, I have given Maria Hill only a B tier. Then we have Quake. I have assigned Quake a C tier because, in my opinion, this is a card that, yes, of course, it can be fun to play to mess up with the location, but it will only win you the game under certain rare conditions. And so usually I don't really feel the need of including this card into my decks. The next card we have is Viper. I have assigned her a B tier mainly because I find this card fun to play, but unfortunately I think it's quite limited in the playability, meaning that typically you will use it to send back to the opponent the goblins, or for example the Void or the Demon from the Hood. But apart from these use cases, typically you will not send anything to your opponent, and that's why for the moment I think B is more than sufficient for Viper, but of course it's a lot of fun to play. Then we have Colin Wing. I have assigned her an A tier because generally speaking I enjoy playing discard decks, and this is one of the best discard cards in pool 3. Of course there are better options as well in pool 3, but I will still say that Colin Wing among the discard cards is one of my favorites. Then we have Mysterio. I know that this is an unpopular opinion because many of you will assign it at least an A, if not even an S, but I have assigned Mysterio only a B. And the reason for that is because me personally, first of all, I never really liked this card, and second, because outside of the deck that I have already mentioned many times, when you can pair it with Angela, Bishop, Beast, Bust, if you don't play this deck, it has, in my opinion, very little room in other decks. That's why I don't think that it deserves more than a B. Generally speaking, you can understand that every time I see a card that it has limited amount of decks it can be played, or for example that it's quite situational in the result, that it's not very consistent, you can understand why I go for a B rather than an A. And talking about the B tier, I think that this applies also very well to Green Goblin, because this is typically a filler that you will use in control decks just to make sure that you have all 12 cards. But outside of a control deck, you will typically not waste a slot for the Green Goblin, so it's quite situational as well. And then we have Cerebro, another card I have assigned it a B tier. This is a card that pairs very well with Brood or with Buzz, for example. It can also be doubled with Mystique, which is a quite nice combo, I will say. But apart from this is also another situational card, so I went only for a B tier. And then we have the very first S tier card of this video, and this is Mystique. Mystique is insanely good. In my opinion, it's one of the strongest cards in the game, even thinking of the entire game, not only of pool 3. It can double Devil Dino, it can double Dark Oak, Iron Man, it can boost further Patriot, Wong, Blue Marvel, Khazar, etc, etc, etc. That's clearly an S in my opinion. And then we move to Gambit. We have a B tier card in my opinion, because even though this is also part of this card decks and I like playing this card decks, honestly I find it a little bit less useful, for example, than a Calling Wing. Typically you could also use it with Wong to make this kind of assault rifle where you're basically bombarding your opponent and destroying all his cards. But yeah, generally speaking, I like discard cards, but Gambit in pool 3 is not the strongest. There are cards that are definitely preferable in my opinion, and that's why the B tier. And then we move to Patriot. Patriot deserve an A tier. Patriot decks are still quite solid, especially if played together with Mystique. Of course, it cannot reach the level of S like Mystique, but it's just one level below, so A tier for Patriot. Then we have Rogue. This is another A. The popularity of Rogue increased further since the release of High Evolutionary, and that's why I decided also here to go with a very high tier. Then we have Brood, another A. As you will see, this section is full of A tier cards. The reason why I have decided to award Brood as well is because it is quite solid. It can be included in different decks like Surfer Sera, for example, Patriot, Cerebro. So as you know, if a card has the possibility to be played in many decks, then that's definitely a solid card, especially if the deck is quite consistent in the result it brings. Then we have Electro, another A tier card. As I said already before, I still prefer Psylocke over Electro because it is less limiting, but as a RAM card slash early Galactus enabler, it is quite good. So honestly, yes, I will still say that Electro deserves an A. Then we have Lockjaw. This is another A tier card in my opinion. I had a very nice Lockjaw deck that I have used to get a lot of cubes, and so honestly I think it's quite solid. Of course, the challenge is to find a good balance between the low and high cost cards to be used in the deck, but if you check my very previous video, you will have an example of a nice deck that works well with Lockjaw, so please refer to that deck, and yeah, then you will understand why I have particularly enjoyed this card and assign it an A tier. The next card we have is Silver Surfer. I have assigned this card a B, and the reason for that is because it used to be very strong, somewhere between S and A, but after the nerf it has lost a lot of popularity. Of course, you can still try to pair it with Brood, Maximus, Storm and other powerful 3-cost cards, but generally speaking it's not as good as it used to be, and because I remember how strong this was some months ago, I had to assign it a B and nothing more than that. Then we have Debris. I have assigned this card an A because this has always been good in Patriot decks, especially with Mystique and Blue Marvel, but now it's even better because it can also be paired in high evolutionary decks, so Debris is absolutely promoted, A tier. Juggernaut, I have assigned this card a B tier because this is something you will typically include in a control slash disrupt deck, but apart from that it doesn't really find a lot of plays and it's quite situational, so B tier. Then we have Moon Knight. I have assigned a B tier also to Moon Knight. The reason for that is because among the discard option is one of my least favorite. I do not like that also the opponent gets one card discarded, because if your opponent is also playing a discard deck, of course that's not very convenient. So that's why B tier. There are better options, as I have already said, for the discard decks in pool 3. Then we have Sauron, BT for him as well, and the reason for that is because, as I have already mentioned, I prefer Zero as a power card enabler. If you play Sauron, then basically you cannot include other kind of ongoing cards in your deck, except the ones where you want to basically disable the negative ongoing effect. So I still prefer Zero over him. Then we have Shadow King, another B tier in my opinion. If this was ongoing, it will become easily one of the strongest cards in the game, especially if paired with Mystique. But as it is, unfortunately, I find it kind of weak, and that's also the reason why it doesn't find a lot of room in the decks we see around. So B tier here as well. Then we have Venom. I have assigned Venom an A tier. In the pool 3, this is one of the best destroy cards. So think of him like my Calling Wing of destroy decks. So Calling Wing for discard and Venom for destroy. I place them on the same level because they are some of the best options. Then we have Wave. This is another card like Mystique that I will place in the absolute top tier, so the S tier. Even after the nerf, it remains a wonderful enabler for many decks, and so absolutely promoted Wave. Doesn't matter if it was nerfed, for me it's still quite strong. Then we have Agent Coulson, B tier. For the same reasons I have highlighted when I was presenting Maria Hill. I don't like having no control on what 4 and 5 cost cards will be picked. It brings too much RNG and it lacks consistency, and so for this reason I cannot assign him more than a B tier. Then we have Kingpin, C tier as well for obvious reason. This after all belongs to the movement decks, and yeah, as I already said, I'm not a big fan, so automatically I have assigned the C here. Then we have Thor. Maybe this is also another unpopular opinion. I have assigned him only a B tier, and the reason for that is because usually it is played together with Jane Foster and or with Lockjaw, but honestly I have better cards for my Lockjaw deck, as I have already highlighted before, so it remains kind of situational for me, and because of that I cannot give him more than a B. Then we have Polaris. I have assigned her an A, and the reason for that is because this is a cheap control / disrupt card. It also has good synergy with Silver Surfer and more recently with Nebula, so this is definitely also in the meta, so A, I think it's more than deserved for Polaris. Then we have Black Cat. I have assigned, unfortunately, this card also a C tier, and the reason for that is because among the discard cards, this is probably one of the weakest. Basically, you have to rely either on Hela or on Ghost Rider to make sure that you can kind of revive this card. Then we have Maximus. I assigned this card an A tier because together with Polaris, this is one of the most powerful 3-cost card. So it's of course ideal for the Sera Surfer, but also a good addition for any other deck for its power. And in the worst case, you can also zero it. So absolutely promoted Maximus as well. The next card we have is Mr. Negative. It is true that it works well with a number of cards like Iron Man, Mystique, Ironheart, Wong, Arnim Zola, so really like a number of cards. But in the end, I have assigned him only a B tier because in my opinion, it lacks consistency. If you go online and check the stats of the decks that are built around Mr. Negative, you will notice that it fails to bring high win rates and cubes won. Then we have Dracula. This is a A tier in my opinion because this card should really be in every single discard deck and in every single Lockjaw variation as well because it has a very strong potential. Just place it in your deck and let it get that very powerful value at the end of the match. Then we have Shuri. This is a card that I think also it's another A tier. Even after the nerf, it remains quite solid, can still be combined very well with She-Hulk, Red Skull, and then for example you can copy the Red Skull with Taskmaster on turn 6. Then we have Super Skrull. I gave him a B tier because on paper it deserves more than a B, but honestly I never managed to consistently get cubes with it in my decks, so I don't know. Maybe you know something that I don't know, but for me this is a B tier. And I know I'm going to disappoint many of you, but honestly I will go for the B tier also for the next card, Wong. And I have to be honest, I really think that this is one of the most overrated cards in the game. And I can tell you why is that. I have a theory for this. My theory is that basically the first time that Wong is played against us, we are so shocked by how powerful it is that we all tend to believe it is actually that strong. It makes this very strong initial impression, but the reality is that once you realize how it is easy to counter Wong, it loses all its magic, because basically you can counter it with Cosmo, with Enchantress, with Juggernaut, with Aero, with Magneto, just to name a few. So in reality, this is not as strong as one would think. So I'm very sorry to disappoint many of you who might have farmed plenty of cubes using Wong in the past, but for me this is not more than a B tier. Same for Absorbing Man, also here B tier. The best use is in a Sera deck, but it's another of those cards that on paper seems incredibly strong, but that in reality it lacks consistency, and that's why I went for the B tier. Realistically, you're going to use Ghost Rider only to retrieve Black Cat or to rescue an accidentally discarded Hela. Apart from that, this card does not really have a lot of usage, so unfortunately I have to go for the C tier for the Ghost Rider. Then the next card is Spider-Man. This, in my opinion, right now is a clear A, because it is usually included in control decks, and as I have already highlighted, these are quite in the meta right now. On the other hand, I must also say that Spider-Man, it has always been oscillating between very useful and very useless from season to season. So please, if you're watching this video in the future, check again if this is still the case, but right now still Spider-Man is in a sweet spot, I will say. Then we have Crystal. This is a C tier. There were some changes on this card, but in my opinion it remains still a bad one. Same as Dazzler, the next one also C tier. It can become quite powerful, but only if you fill location with cards like Ultron, Debris or Squirrel Girl. And the same applies also to Rescue. Apart from the combo Rescue Professor X, it's quite situational. Moreover, you will announce already where you're going to play the next card. So yeah, honestly, C tier here as well. And then we have Miles Morales. I have assigned him a B tier. He's a bit better than the average movement cards, but still far away from the strong cards in the game, so that's why I cannot give him more than a B. And I have also assigned the B tier to the next one, that is Omega Red. It has good synergies with Zabu and other ongoing cards, but still it's just another card that is powerful on paper, but that in reality it fails to consistently deliver. Then we have Rockslide, and for him I have assigned him a clear A, because in my opinion it's a very sweet card right now, considering also the very strong affinity with a powerful card such as Dorkoak. So basically, if you make a deck where you have Rockslide and Dorkoak, and then you bring to the party also Dino and Mystique, you are basically ready to party hard. So Rockslide is a clear A. Then we have Drax. I have assigned him a B. Generally speaking, is not that strong like most of the Guardians of the Galaxy cards, with the exception of Nebula and maybe Star-Lord and Gamora. So I cannot give him more than a B. Still remaining in the B tier, I think also Hellcow should remain in this range, because similarly to what I've said for Gambit, this is a solid card in a discard deck, but there are better options in pool 3 when it comes to discard. And here the main problem you might have is that Hellcow might empty your hand too rapidly. Of course, with a discard deck you want to do that, right? You want to discard cards, but you also want to make sure that you have enough cards to play, right? So that's a little bit the downside, but I will still say that a B is absolutely fine. Then we have Crossbones. I have assigned him a C, because this is basically a card that you will typically use as a filler in a Zabu deck, mainly to secure one location where you are already winning, but otherwise it is quite irrelevant, so I cannot give it more than a C. Then we have Atuma, B tier. This is often part of control decks, but it's less relevant than other cards that are usually part of a control deck, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because it requires either armor or 0 to be playable. Then we have Sentry. I have assigned Sentry a B tier as well. Basically the same things that I have said for the Hood, they apply to Sentry as well, but I have assigned it a lower tier because for a 4-cost cards there are better options, while the Hood, for his cost, let's say, it has a better ratio cost value. Then we have Mary, one of the Daredevil's lovers actually. I have assigned her a B tier because it's one of the most powerful 4-cost card, but it obliges you to use either Zero or Sauron to be actually playable without having, let's say, the penalty. Then we have Taskmaster. I have assigned him an A tier because even though Shuri was recently changed, the changes to Shuri do not make him less playable, in particular as part of a Shuri deck, so it's still pretty powerful. Moving to Magic, I have assigned her the B tier because none of the deck where this card is fundamental has demonstrated to be consistent in terms of win rate or cubes won. So for me, it fails to deliver like other cards, like for example Mr. Negative. So I went only for the B tier in this case. Then we have Ronan the Accuser, also in the B tier. Another card that on paper seems strong, but that in reality it has limited applications and success. Maximum Rock Slide, Baron Mordo, and Master Mold from the pool 4 are his best friend in case if you want to play him, but I believe that there are better decks with better cards than Ronan the Accuser. I have assigned to the B tier also the next card, which is Valkyrie, mainly because I struggle to get consistent wins with her, but honestly speaking, this could have also been an A. Because in the end, if we think how nicely it works with ongoing cards, or for example with Bust Cerebro decks, or also simply as an anti-Shuri, so to say, I think that it has a number of nice possible applications. But on the other hand, I don't know, I really struggle to make her work properly, and that's why I downgraded her to B. But if you think that it should be an A, let's say that I could also see your point. Then we have Black Panther, another card that I have assigned to the B tier, and this is because it's actually a monster with Wong, and then play it with Arnim Zola as well. But as I said, Wong is quite easy to counter, and so Black Panther as well, and that's why I have assigned them to the same tier. Then we have Sera, another overpowered card. That's why this is in the S tier together with cards like Mystique and Wave. This is one of the strongest cards since the release of the game. It's basically the ruler of control decks, and yeah, it remains always very consistent. Then we have Captain Marvel. I have assigned her the B tier. This is a nice card that in the past I used to include way more often in my decks. On paper it is very powerful, but in reality it is quite situational, and that's why I went for the B tier. Same as Black Bolt. The release of Stature made it a little bit better than what it used to be, but in my opinion is still far away from becoming a top card. Then I have given the B tier also to Nick Fury for the same reason that I have already mentioned, for example, for Agent Coulson. I don't like these cards that bring a lot of RNG where you don't have control on what cards are going to be in your hand. I have assigned also to the B tier Aero because it used to be somewhere between S and A in the past, but after the nerf it has lost a number of points. It's still playable though, and that's why it should still be at least B, but of course we cannot compare Aero today with what it used to be months ago. Then thinking still of the B tier, we do also have Jane Foster here. As I've already said, this usually accompany Thor, and as I have already mentioned, I usually have better cards that I choose over Thor, and so consequently I do not use Jane Foster that frequently as well. The end of the list is getting closer and closer, but please stay tuned because from now on we are going to have a number of powerful cards and I want to tell you about all of them. Starting from Dr. Octopus. I have assigned him to the A tier because I have neglected this card on a number of occasions, but now I am fully ready to acknowledge my mistake and its power. You can, for example, play it in a Galactus deck just to empty your opponent's hand before you place Galactus, or even just with the idea of getting the powerful card of your opponent in one location and then Shang-Chi them all immediately after. So it's quite powerful. At first I considered this card quite situational, but I must say that I was wrong, and this card it's quite solid if used correctly. Then we have Red Skull. I have assigned him also to the A tier. Honestly, this card decreased in popularity, but for me it remains still quite solid. It can still be included in a Shuri deck even after the changes to Shuri, so for me it's still absolutely playable and still very strong. You can also play Zero or Sauron to make sure that then you remove the penalty, but generally speaking, yeah, the card still works like a charm, so for me this is also a clear A. We have in the A tier also the next one, which is Arnim Zola. Usually this is paired with Black Panther, and we have already talked about it, but you can also pair it, for example, with a very strong card from pool 4, which is Null. Independently from the card you're going to use with Arnim Zola, of course, always pay attention of the order, let's say who is going to play first, because you don't want to have your powerful card destroyed by a Shang-Chi before it gets copied by Arnim Zola. But apart from this thing to take into account, the card is still absolutely solid, so for me, also this one deserves tier A. We have another A tier in the next card, which is Leader. This is a card that changed so many times, and it went from being insanely good to absolute trash, and now it's strong again. So of course I cannot promise that this will still be the case when you will watch this video. Maybe you will see it 6 months from now and the situation will be completely different. But for the moment I will still say that now Leader is again in a sweet spot. Ladies and gentlemen, the next card is a character that to a certain degree has defined my internet persona. I'm talking about Doctor Doom, so of course I had to assign him to the S tier. Now of course I'm kidding, he belongs to the S tiers, but not because of this reason, not because I have a special connection with this character. The reason for that is because Doctor Doom simply deserves to be a top tier card. And the reason for that is because even though at first sight it doesn't seem to be the strongest card in the game, or one of the strongest cards in the game, it still remains one of the most consistent turn 6 card. I can hardly think of other cards that granted me so many cubes consistently when played at the end of the match. Maybe some of you will think that it should be A instead, but then think again of how many matches you won with him, and then you will probably agree with me. I have assigned also to the S tier Hela, and the reason for that is because if we think of the discard options in pool 3, yes, of course we have solid cards like, for example, Colin Wing, as I have said, but in the end, if we think of the queen of the discard deck, that's without any doubt Hela. The possibility of bringing back all the cards that were discarded during the game is insane. So if you are running a discard deck, Ayla is the must-have card in your deck, without any doubt, and that's why she clearly deserves as well an S. And I have assigned to the tier S also the next card, which is Ultron. Basically what I said for Doctor Doom applies also for him. If you think of how consistent it is as a turn 6 card, there are a few cards that can compete with him, like for example Doctor Doom. I do not even know how many matches I have won by playing Ultron in combination with Patriot to make sure that then all the bots get basically boosted farther. Then you can increase this with Blue Marvel, with the Khazar, so it's a very powerful deck in my opinion. Of course, maybe it's not as popular as it used to be, as the popularity of Patriot, I think it kind of decreased over time, but it still remains a very solid deck. And of course, Ultron is a very nice addition to a Patriot deck, and that's why, in my opinion, it still deserves to have an S. Then we have She-Hulk. I have assigned her the A tier. She was nerfed, but even after the nerf, I still think that she remains quite strong, similarly to what I was basically saying for Shuri. So for me, the A tier is still fully deserved. Then we have Helicarrier. I have assigned this card a B tier because, yeah, as I already mentioned, I am not a big fan of those cards that bring a lot of random option in the game, like for example Nick Fury, Agent Coulson, etc. And in the hand also Helicarrier, you don't have the control on the cards that will end up in your hand, and that's why I have assigned it only a B. B tier also for the next card, which is Orca. It was recently buffed, and I believe that it helped this card to go from completely useless to kind of playable, especially as an anti-Galactus card, but it is still far from becoming a top tier card, and so yeah, I cannot really give it more than a B. Then we have Magneto. I have assigned him to a tier A. This card has always been quite solid, quite strong since the beginning of the game. There are different ways you could use it. Of course, it's a candidate for the lockjaw lottery, or you could also include him in a control/disrupt deck. So plenty of option, and the card itself is quite powerful. So definitely A is deserved as well. The next card we have is Agatha. I have assigned her a tier C, even though I had a lot of fun playing with this card and experimenting with different combinations, like for example with discard decks or with ramp decks. I tried them all to try to find some way of getting some consistency out of Agatha, but honestly I must say that after many experiments, this card still does not have a way to become kind of consistent, and that's why I believe that it does not make much sense to play it at all, and that's why I went for the C tier. With the next card, Giganto, we go back to the A tier. This is a card that is often neglected by other players, but that I find quite flexible and powerful. You can use it, for example, in a lockjaw lottery, you can include it in a discard deck, or simply as a powerful finisher for the left location. Alternatively, if you play, for example, 0 as last card in turn 5, you can also use it for turn 6, wherever you prefer. So honestly, this card is still very strong because it brings a lot of power to your deck. So in my opinion, tier A is absolutely deserved. Then the next two cards, we can comment them together as they both belong to destroy decks. I have assigned the A tier to Destroyer and the S tier to Death. The reason why I have assigned that to the top tier is because, in my opinion, if you are going to have a destroy deck, this is the must-have card. Similarly to what I was saying for Ela and the discard decks, the same applies to Death and Destroy. Destroyer is also a powerful card, that's why I have assigned him an A tier, but I cannot place him on the same level of Death because doesn't have the same kind of power. And that's all, guys. I managed to cover all 98 cards in a decent amount of time. I'm quite proud of that. I hope you found this video helpful. Now I invite you to leave a comment down below and let me know if there are any cards you feel deserve a different tier. Your feedback is, as always, much appreciated, and I can't wait to hear your votes. Until next time, cheers!